At 76, Bonnie Raitt isn't trying to prove anything anymore. She's not chasing hits. She's not trying to stay relevant. And she's definitely not someone who built her career on personal drama. For decades, she kept her private life exactly that. Private. No headlines, no public heartbreaks, no oversharing. But time has a way of changing how people talk about their lives. And now, after everything she's been through, the success, the failures, the quiet moments in between, Bonnie has finally said something that caught people off guard. He was the love of my life. That's it. Just one sentence that carries years of meaning behind it. And the thing is, if you followed her career, you know she's never been the kind of person to say something like that lightly. Bonnie Raitt has always been grounded, careful with her words, real. So when she says something like this, it makes you stop and wonder, who was he? To understand that, you have to go all the way back, before the awards, before the fame, before anyone even knew her name. Because Bonnie's story didn't start with heartbreak. It started with music. Bonnie Raitt was born into a world where music wasn't something distant. It was part of everyday life. Her father, John Raitt, was already a well-known performer on Broadway. He had a powerful voice, the kind that filled theaters night after night. Her mother, while not as publicly famous, was deeply connected to the arts as well. So from the beginning, Bonnie wasn't just hearing music on the radio. She was surrounded by it. Backstage conversations, rehearsals, performances. The rhythm of creative life was just normal to her. But what's interesting is, she didn't grow up dreaming of being a star. In fact, she was kind of the opposite. She was curious, observant, a little rebellious in her own quiet way. She wasn't chasing attention. If anything, she seemed more interested in figuring things out for herself. As a kid, she moved between worlds. On one side, there was the structured life of school and growing up like anyone else. On the other side, there was this exposure to performance and artistry that most people never get to see up close. But even with that background, nothing about her early years screamed future celebrity. She wasn't pushed into the spotlight. She didn't have a clear plan. And maybe that's what made the difference later on. Because when Bonnie finally connected with music in her own way, it wasn't about living up to someone else's expectations. It was personal, raw, real. And it didn't come from Broadway. Came from somewhere completely different. By the time Bonnie Raitt reached college, things started to shift. She enrolled at Radcliffe, but her real education wasn't happening in classrooms. It was happening in small clubs, in record collections, and in the voices of artists who weren't polished or commercial. That's where she found the blues. And once she found it, everything changed. Artists like Mississippi Fred McDowell weren't just musicians to her, they were storytellers. Their music wasn't about perfection. It was about feeling, about truth, about lived experience. That hit her in a way nothing else had. She started teaching herself slide guitar, a style that wasn't easy to master. It required patience, control, and a deep connection to the sound. And somehow she made it her own. Not by copying, but by listening. You could hear it in the way she played. There was space, emotion, restraint. She didn't overdo it. She let the music breathe. And that became her signature. Around this time, she made a decision that would shape the rest of her life. She stepped away from the traditional path. No safe career. No backup plan. Just music. It wasn't the obvious choice, especially for someone with her background. But Bonnie wasn't interested in doing what was expected. She wanted something real. So she started performing wherever she could. Small venues, college campuses, local gigs. Nothing glamorous. No big crowds. Just her, a guitar, and a sound that didn't quite fit into the mainstream at the time. And that's where her identity started to take shape. Not as a star, but as an artist. Someone who didn't just sing songs, but lived inside them. And while the world hadn't caught on yet, something important was happening. She was building something that would last, even if it took years for anyone else to notice. By the early 1970s, Bonnie Raitt was no longer just a college performer trying to find her sound. She had made a quiet but firm decision. This was her life now. No shortcuts. No safety net. Just music. Her big break didn't come in a dramatic, overnight way. There was no single moment where everything changed. Instead, it happened slowly, almost quietly, the way most real careers do. She got noticed by people who mattered. Not necessarily executives chasing the next big pop star, but musicians. People who understood what she was doing. That mattered more to her than fame. Her self-titled debut album dropped in 1971. It wasn't designed to dominate charts. It didn't follow trends. It didn't try to sound like anyone else on the radio. It was just her. Blues, folk, a little rock, all mixed together in a way that felt natural instead of calculated. Her voice wasn't overly polished. It had texture, a kind of emotional weight that made you believe what she was singing. And then there was the guitar. The slide guitar became her signature, but she didn't treat it like a trick. It wasn't flashy for the sake of attention. It felt like an extension of her voice, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, always controlled. Critics noticed. Musicians respected her. But mainstream success? That was a different story. She wasn't easy to market. The industry at the time was looking for clear categories. Pop, rock, something easy to package and sell. Bonnie didn't fit cleanly into any of them. So instead of massive radio play, she built something slower. Touring. Night after night, small venues, mid-size halls, sometimes opening for bigger acts, sometimes headlining her own modest shows. It wasn't glamorous. It was work. Real work. She connected with audiences one performance at a time. People who came to her shows didn't just listen, they paid attention. They stayed. And over time, that turned into a loyal following. Still, there was pressure. Being a woman in that scene wasn't simple. The industry was heavily male-dominated, especially in blues and rock. Female artists were often pushed toward specific images or sounds. But Bonnie didn't play that game. She dressed how she wanted. She played how she wanted. And she didn't try to soften herself to fit expectations. That independence earned her respect, but it also meant she wasn't always given the same opportunities as others. There were moments where things could have gone differently. She could have adjusted her style, made more commercial choices, chased bigger hits earlier. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed consistent. Album after album through the 70s, she kept refining her sound. Some records did better than others, but none of them made her a superstar. At least not yet. And that was the strange part of her early career. She was successful, but not famous in the way people usually define it. Respected, but not widely known. Working constantly, but still waiting for something bigger. But if you look back now, that period wasn't about waiting. It was about building. Because everything she learned during those years, the discipline, the connection with live audiences, the confidence to stay true to herself, that's what made the next chapters of her life possible. Even if, at the time, it didn't feel like enough. Before the fame really hit, before the awards and recognition, Bonnie Raitt was already living a life that made relationships complicated. Not impossible, just complicated. Because from the start, her life didn't follow a steady routine. She was on the road, moving from city to city, playing shows, meeting people, then leaving again. That kind of rhythm makes it hard to build something stable. You can connect with someone quickly in that environment, maybe even deeply, but staying connected? That's the hard part. In her early years, Bonnie had relationships. Real ones, not just casual encounters, but most of them stayed out of the spotlight. She wasn't the kind of person to bring her personal life into interviews or turn it into part of her public image. So a lot of those connections were never fully documented. But you can understand the pattern. Intense beginnings. Strong emotional pull. Then distance. Not always because something went wrong, but because life kept pulling her in different directions. Touring schedules don't wait for relationships to catch up. Recording sessions don't pause for personal moments. And when both people are trying to build their own lives, timing starts to matter more than feelings. That's something Bonnie seemed to learn early. There's also the fact that she wasn't someone looking to depend on anyone else. Independence wasn't just part of her career, it was part of who she was. She made her own decisions, lived on her own terms. And while that gave her strength, it also meant that relationships had to fit into a life that was already full. Not everyone could do that. Not everyone wanted to. Some people need stability, routine, a shared daily life. And Bonnie's world didn't always offer that. So even when the connection was real, it didn't always last. There's a difference between loving someone and being able to build a life with them. And that gap showed up more than once in her life. She didn't rush into marriage early, even when she could have. That says something. It suggests she understood, at least on some level, that not every strong feeling needs to turn into something permanent. Or maybe she just hadn't found the right situation yet. Either way, she took her time. There were also moments where relationships ended not because of distance, but because of timing in a different sense, where both people were in different stages of life. One ready for something serious, the other still figuring things out. That kind of mismatch doesn't always show up immediately. Sometimes it takes months, even years, before it becomes clear. And by then, it's harder to walk away cleanly. But Bonnie wasn't someone who forced things to continue just to avoid endings. If something wasn't working, she let it go. That doesn't mean it was easy. It just means she didn't ignore reality. And over time, those experiences started to shape how she saw love. Less about labels. Less about expectations. More about connection. What felt real in the moment. What stayed with you after it ended. By the time she eventually got married to Michael O'Keefe, she had already lived through enough relationships to understand that marriage wasn't some final answer. It was just another form of connection. One that might work, or might not. And looking back now, it's clear that the relationships that didn't last weren't failures in her mind. They were part of the process. Part of understanding what mattered. And maybe more importantly, what didn't. Because not every relationship leaves a lasting mark. But a few of them do. And those are the ones that stay with you, even when everything else moves on. Even when years pass. Even when life looks completely different. Those are the ones that don't really end. They just become quieter. And somewhere in that quiet, one connection stood out more than the rest. Even if she didn't say it out loud at the time. By the time Bonnie Raitt entered the 1990s, her life looked different on the surface. She had finally achieved the kind of recognition that had taken years to build. Her album Nick of Time changed everything. Awards, attention, respect from the wider public, it all came at once. And somewhere in the middle of that shift, she got married. In 1991, she married Michael O'Keefe. From the outside, it made sense. He was an established actor. She was now a major name in music. Both understood the pressures of public life. Both had careers that demanded time, energy, and constant movement. It looked balanced. But what looks right on paper doesn't always work in real life. Their relationship wasn't built in a slow, quiet environment. It existed in the middle of two busy careers. Schedules didn't always line up. Time together wasn't always guaranteed. And that kind of life can create distance without anyone intending it. Bonnie wasn't someone who shared every detail publicly, so a lot of what happened stayed between them. But over time, it became clear that something wasn't holding. The challenge wasn't just about time. It was about rhythm. Two people can care about each other deeply and still struggle to find a way to live side by side. Especially when both are used to independence. Especially when both have spent years building lives that don't revolve around anyone else. Bonnie had spent most of her adult life on the road, making decisions on her own terms. That kind of independence doesn't just disappear when you get married. And Michael had his own path, his own commitments, his own identity outside of the relationship. There wasn't a clear villain in the story. No big scandal. No dramatic public fallout. Just two people trying to make something work, and slowly realizing it wasn't. They divorced in 1999. 8 years. Long enough to matter. Long enough to leave a mark. But not long enough to last. For Bonnie, the end of that marriage wasn't just about losing a partner. It was about facing something deeper. The idea that even when you try to do things the right way, even when the timing seems right, even when the connection is real, it still might not be enough. And that realization stays with you. She didn't rush into another marriage after that. In fact, she didn't remarry at all. That says something. Not necessarily about failure, but about understanding. Because by that point in her life, Bonnie Raitt had seen enough to know that love isn't defined by titles. Not by husband or wife. Not by how things look from the outside. Sometimes, The most important relationships aren't the ones that fit into a clear category. And sometimes, the person who means the most isn't the one you end up with. That idea, the one that doesn't make sense at first, is the one that leads back to her confession. The one she didn't fully explain. Not yet. By the early 1980s, something started to shift, and not in a good way. 4 years, Bonnie Raitt had been building a steady, respected career. She wasn't a massive star, but she had her place. Critics respected her. Musicians admired her. Fans who discovered her stayed loyal. But the music industry doesn't always reward consistency. Trends change. Executives change. And suddenly, what once felt stable starts to slip. Her albums weren't selling the way labels wanted. Radio wasn't playing her as much. The sound that made her unique didn't fit neatly into what the industry was pushing at the time. And eventually, it caught up with her. She was dropped by her record label. Just like that. No long goodbye. No transition plan. One day she had support behind her, and the next, she was on her own again. That kind of moment hits hard, especially after you've spent years putting everything into your work. It's not just about money or exposure. It's about identity. Because for Bonnie, music wasn't just a job. It was who she was. And now, suddenly, there were questions. Was it over? Had she missed her chance? Was everything she built starting to disappear? At the same time, her personal life wasn't giving her much relief either. The pressure, the uncertainty, it started to build up. And like a lot of people in that situation, she turned to something to cope. Alcohol. At first, it didn't seem like a major issue. Touring life already came with late nights, drinking, that kind of environment. It was easy to blend in. Easy to tell yourself it wasn't a problem. But over time, it became something more. Not out of control in a dramatic public way, but present enough to matter. It affected her energy, her focus, her sense of direction. And maybe the hardest part was that it didn't solve anything. The doubts were still there. The uncertainty about her career was still there. If anything, it made things feel heavier. There were moments during that period where everything felt unclear. No label. No big projects. No guarantee that things would turn around. And when you're used to moving forward, even slowly, that kind of standstill can feel worse than failure. But here's the thing about Bonnie Raitt. She wasn't someone who collapsed under pressure. She didn't rush to reinvent herself just to stay visible. She didn't chase trends to get back into the spotlight. Instead, she stepped back. Not in a dramatic way. Not as a public statement. Just quietly. And in that space, something started to change. She began to look at her life differently. Not just her career, but everything around it. The habits. The routines. The things she had been ignoring. And eventually, she made a decision that would affect everything that came next. She got sober. No big announcement. No performance around it. Just a choice. A clear, grounded decision to take control again. It didn't fix everything overnight. Her career wasn't suddenly back on top. Opportunities didn't just appear out of nowhere. But internally, something shifted. There was clarity again. Focus. A sense that maybe things weren't over. Just paused. And that pause, as difficult as it was, ended up being one of the most important turning points in her entire life. Because what came next wasn't just a comeback. It was something deeper than that. When people talk about comebacks, they usually imagine something dramatic. A big return. A sudden hit. A moment where everything changes overnight. But for Bonnie Raitt, it didn't feel like that at all. It felt steady. After getting sober and taking a step back, she wasn't trying to reclaim fame. She wasn't chasing relevance. If anything, she seemed more grounded than ever. She had nothing to prove. And that mindset changed everything. In 1989, she released an album called Nick of Time. At that point, expectations weren't high. She had been out of the spotlight for a while. The industry had moved on to newer names, different sounds. But this album was different. Not because it was designed to be a hit, but because it was honest. The songs reflected where she was in life. Not trying to sound young. Not pretending to be something she wasn't. Just real stories, real emotions, real perspective. And people noticed. Slowly at first. Then all at once. The album started gaining attention. Sales picked up. Radio began playing her again. Critics responded strongly. But more importantly, listeners connected with it. It didn't feel forced. It felt earned. And then came the moment that changed how the world saw her. At the Grammy Awards, Nick of Time won Album of the Year. That's not a small award. That's the kind of recognition that puts you back at the center of the industry. Suddenly, Bonnie Raitt wasn't just a respected artist. She was a major name again. But the difference this time was how she handled it. In her earlier years, success might have felt uncertain, something that could disappear at any moment. Now, it felt different. She understood it. She didn't depend on it. She had already been through the phase where everything could fall apart. She knew what that felt like. So when success came back, she didn't let it define her. She just kept going. More albums followed. More tours. More recognition. But it never felt like she was chasing something. She was just doing the work. And that confidence, the quiet kind, not the loud, performative version, became part of her identity. People trusted her music because she wasn't pretending. She wasn't trying to stay young or fit into trends. She was just herself. And that made her stand out more than ever. But even with all that success, one thing didn't change. Her private life stayed private. She didn't suddenly start sharing personal stories in interviews. She didn't turn her relationships into headlines. She kept that part of her world separate. Which is why, years later, when she finally made that simple statement, "He was the love of my life," it carried so much weight. Because it came from someone who had spent a lifetime choosing what not to say. And now, for the first time, she was saying just enough to make people wonder what had been there all along. For most of her life, Bonnie Raitt kept one part of her story carefully guarded. Not hidden in a secretive way. Just protected. She talked about music. She talked about her influences. She talked about her struggles, her sobriety, her career ups and downs. But when it came to certain relationships, especially the ones that mattered the most, she stayed quiet. Not because there was nothing to say, but because some things are harder to explain than others. Over the years, she was linked to different people. Some relationships were known, others barely mentioned. There were moments where it looked like she might settle into something permanent, something defined. But that never really happened. Even her marriage to Michael O'Keefe, which lasted several years, didn't become the central love story of her life. And that says a lot. Because when people look back at their lives, especially later on, they tend to point to the obvious moments. The marriage, the long-term partnership, the relationship everyone knew about. But Bonnie's story doesn't follow that pattern. The person she's talking about, the one she would eventually call the love of my life, wasn't necessarily the most public figure in her story. It wasn't the relationship that got the most attention. It wasn't even the one that lasted the longest. But it was the one that stayed with her. And that's the difference. Some relationships fade. They belong to a certain time in your life, and when that time passes, so do they. But others, they don't go anywhere. They change shape. They move into the background. But they stay. From what she's hinted over the years, this connection wasn't simple. It wasn't built under perfect conditions. There were timing issues, distance, careers pulling in different directions. The kind of real-life complications that don't make for clean endings. They may not have been able to build a life together in the traditional sense. But that didn't erase what was there. And sometimes, that makes it even stronger. Because when something isn't forced into a structure, when it isn't defined by marriage or daily routine, it can exist in a different way. One that isn't tied to success or failure. Just feeling. There's also the reality that Bonnie spent much of her life moving, touring, recording, traveling. That kind of lifestyle doesn't always leave room for stability. It can make relationships intense but short-lived. Or meaningful, but hard to maintain. And in that kind of life, timing becomes everything. You can meet the right person at the wrong moment. You can feel something real but not have the space to build on it. And years later, when everything has slowed down, that's the connection that stands out. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Bonnie never turned that relationship into a public narrative. She didn't write songs directly naming it. She didn't use it to define her image. She just carried it with her, quietly. And maybe that's why it lasted. Because it wasn't exposed to outside pressure. It wasn't shaped by expectations. It didn't have to become anything more than what it was. Real. So when she finally spoke about it, when she reduced it to one simple sentence, it didn't feel incomplete. It felt intentional. Because some stories don't need every detail to be understood. At 76, people tend to speak differently. Not because they have something to prove, but because they don't. For Bonnie Raitt, that shift is clear. There's no pressure to protect an image. No need to hold back for the sake of perception. What's left is honesty. And that's where the confession comes in. He was the love of my life. No long explanation followed. No attempt to turn it into a story that fits neatly into headlines. Just a statement. Simple, direct, final. And the impact of that statement comes from everything she didn't say. Because when someone spends decades avoiding that kind of language, avoiding defining their personal life in those terms, and then suddenly says it, it matters. It means she's thought about it, sat with it, lived enough life to understand what she's saying, and accepted it. There's no sense of regret in the way she talks about it. That's important. She's not looking back and wishing things had turned out differently. She's not framing it as a missed opportunity or a lost future. It's not about what could have been. It's about what was. And that distinction changes everything. Because it means she's not measuring that relationship by traditional standards. Not by how long it lasted. Not by whether it led to marriage. Not by whether it became permanent. She's measuring it by how deeply it affected her. And by that standard, it stands above everything else. That kind of perspective doesn't usually come early in life. It comes after years of experience, after relationships that worked and didn't work, after successes and disappointments, after enough time has passed to see things clearly. Bonnie Raitt has had all of that. She's had the career highs, the personal struggles, the marriage that didn't last, the independence that defined her. And through all of it, this one connection remained the most meaningful. Not in a loud way, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that lasted. And maybe that's the point she's making, without spelling it out. That love doesn't always look the way people expect. It doesn't always follow a timeline. It doesn't always lead to something permanent. But that doesn't make it less real. If anything, sometimes it makes it more so. Now, at this stage in her life, there's no reason to keep that to herself anymore. Not because she owes anyone the story, but because she's comfortable enough to say it out loud and leave it there. No extra explanation. No need to convince anyone. Just the truth as she sees it. And sometimes that's all there is. So what do you think about Bonnie Raitt's story and the love she carried with her all these years? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear what you think about this kind of love, the kind that doesn't always fit into a perfect ending. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe. We keep things real here, no exaggeration, no noise, just stories that actually mean something. And I'll see you in the next one.